The college football playoff is about to change as we know it. Now, you knew changes were coming in 2026, but Ross Dellenger of Yahoo reports last night that the SEC and the Big Ten throwing their weight around and saying, if we're going to be at this party, we're going to make sure we have our guaranteed number of seats at this said party. That is, of course, the college football playoff. So what's going on? What does it mean? And then what's our take on it? We'll unpack all that. College football sickos, make sure you're subscribed right here. How I know you're a college football sicko is you're watching a college football YouTube video in the month of February. Welcome, you're one of us. Glad to have you a part of this. So, to recap it, Ross Dellenger reports last night that as the playoff expands, whether it's 14 or 16 teams, those are the two numbers being looked at right now. The Big Ten and the SEC hold all the cards when it comes to viewership, when it comes to revenue, and they're making sure everyone else feels them and says, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to be a part of your playoff, we are going to have 4 spots in the future of this playoff. That's the number that's being talked about right now. So 4 each, 4 for the Big Ten and 4 for the SEC. Obviously, this would create a lot of money for both those conferences. The playoff in itself already creates a ton of money, and as it expands, it'll create even more. But why is this happening? When I got to thinking about a comparison for this, you start thinking about different functions you've been invited to or different parties you've been to. Who gets to have the say on the guest list? The person hosting the party, right? Who usually hosts the party? The rich friend. So if you want to be at the rich friend's party, you probably have to abide by their certain number of rules. Otherwise, if you're not going to abide by their rules, guess what? The rich friend will say, we'll have our own party, we'll keep our party a little bit more exclusive, and we'll go do our party somewhere else and you cannot attend. Ross Dellenger, at the front of his article, actually reports that was on the table at one point in time for the Big Ten and the SEC. They said, hey, if you don't want to meet our requests and sign over, in writing that you're going to meet our requests, we'll just go do our own playoff with the Big Ten and the SEC. Put a quick pin in that. When the playoff rankings came out during one of those reveal shows last season, I said, if I'm the SEC and I see one of my teams that I think would ragdoll, fill in the blank with any other team that, has an automatic bid into this thing, I might just take my ball and go play with the Big Ten and make our own playoff in that sense. Now, I'm not here to tell you the Alabamas of the world or Ole Misses of the world should have made the playoff. What I am saying is the SEC and the Big Ten, with them being the ones that hold the cards, I think it's noteworthy now that was actually on the table. It was never about bias for how we saw the SEC or the Big Ten. It's always been about the SEC having bias towards the SEC and the Big Ten having bias towards the Big Ten. Why? Because nobody's in charge. There is no commissioner. There is no checks and balance of power. This is Wild West is a strong way to put it, but I think that's kind of the best way to describe how this whole thing is shaking out. With the SEC and the Big Ten holding all the power, they're going to decide how the playoff format looks here going forward in regards to their automatic qualifiers. So what does it mean? That's great that we got this story out there, but what does it actually mean? Likely, it means the SEC is going to go to 9 conference games. The reason why they had stayed at 8 for the longest time is because they were saying, hey, we're not going to play each other more than we have to because you're telling us that it's about wins and losses, and so it's not a benefit for a Georgia to schedule an extra game and have to play an A&M or whoever else fill in the blank there with whatever conference opponent you want to fill in there. Now they're saying, okay, well, we have a safety net built in. We're down to live a little bit more dangerously. We have 4 spots guaranteed. Yeah, we'll play each other. Matter of fact, another thing that's baked into this whole discussion as we're talking about the Big Ten and the SEC moving forward, a scheduling agreement where the SEC and the Big Ten are actually going to potentially have annual games where they play against each other. And again, going back to the safety net, if we're not worried about our guaranteed number of spots, we know we got 4 teams in, whether we're the Big Ten or the SEC. Yeah, we're down to make some more money. Because you think about this whole situation in a lot of ways being about money, again, which is one of the pushbacks we had against this playoff expanding to begin with. I digress. Yeah, Alabama, Ohio State, have to think that's going to make a pretty good amount of cash for those involved. Same deal with a Texas and Oregon and so on and so forth. So if you're a we'll see better matchups fan, then you're going to see better matchups as this thing progresses, and that could be a benefit of this whole thing. It's also worth noting the conference championship weekend is likely going to change, at least for the Big Ten and the SEC. And Dellenger reports that there's the possibility of like 3 versus 6, or it's in his article, he toys the idea of 3 playing 6 in the SEC and 4 versus 5 in the SEC playing each other, as well as the Big Ten. And instead of it being a conference title weekend, it's a conference play-in weekend where those 2 teams compete for the last 2 automatic qualifiers of their respective conferences. Makes a lot of sense. If I'm the Big Ten or the SEC, I don't want my top 2 horses having more tread on the tires by the time they have to go make a playoff run. That in itself makes sense. So you'd have your regular season champion would be how you would divvy that up, and then you have a couple of teams playing for the playoff. So what does it mean for the Big 12 and the ACC? If you were trying to get out of your conference before, you're absolutely trying to get out of your conference now. Like you will go hire your Harvey Specter and your Mike Ross, and you say, okay, go to work, get us to the SEC, get us to the Big 10. Have to believe like a Clemson and a Florida State are probably working overtime if they weren't already working overtime before that, because they want to have a better shot at the playoff, make more money, all those things. When you talk about how the playoff's going to look going forward, though, in terms of other spots for the Big 12 and the ACC, like you do the math, if we're going to 14 teams, the committee's role is going to be very much so diminished in this whole thing, if they exist at all. Because if we have 14 teams, 8 of those off the bat are decided. You got the Big 10 with 4, the SEC with 4. Okay, so that's 8. The conference championships for the other conferences, it sounds like would still be intact based on what I can gather from this. So that's 3 more teams. You have the highest ranked G5 champ, the Big 12 champ, the ACC champ. So that's 11 teams. If we're at 14, the committee's going to decide on what, 3 teams? We go to 16, maybe it's 5 teams. Where's Notre Dame in all this? Notre Dame is protected now. If we go to a 14-team playoff, Notre Dame just has to finish in the top 14 to get a spot. So that's where Notre Dame's sitting. The committee, a lot of y'all have issues with the committee, and I'm one of them, but the committee, it sounds like, is going to be increasingly less important as we look to the future of this college football playoff. So here's my take on this. I get it. I've said the entire time, I get it. If you don't have a commissioner, the big boys are going to act in the best interest of themselves, and it's hard to blame them. If I'm Tony Petitti or Greg Sankey, I'm trying to do what's best for my conference. I'm not worried about your conference or the health of the sport. I'm worried about my conferences, my teams, my schools making more money. So I get it. I can't say that I like it, because the college football that I grew up with was a national product in a lot of ways, and I appreciated that. The Pac-10 was a thing. I appreciated what the Big 12 was when Oklahoma and Texas were over there. I appreciated what the sport was built on. And so it's interesting now as we look to where we're headed, I'd be in favor of no auto bids. Like, I'm not here telling you the Big 10 and the SEC should have their automatic qualifiers. I get it because they're holding the cards, but I'm not telling you I'm in favor of it. If it were me, I would say let's go to, I'd have a smaller number of teams, but if we have to go to 14 teams, let's go 14 teams, top 14 teams that are ranked in the college football playoff rankings at the end of the season. That should be your playoff conference champions. We can figure that out. But let's go with just the highest ranked teams. Let's reward teams. Let's not reward conferences. I digress. That's my take. But it's interesting as we look at how we got here. There's a lot to be said about conference realignment and how that whole situation played out. We could probably have a full hour show on that. It's the offseason. Maybe we will. But in regards to the playoff, a lot of people were shouting at the top of their lungs for an expanded playoff. And what was their reasoning? Inclusion, opportunity, a chance to compete with the big boys, all those things. And us on this show pushed back and said, are we sure we want to do that? Because as this playoff expands, tell you what, it's not going to benefit the little guy. Not that we don't want it to, but it's not going to benefit the little guy. We said that many times on this show, and when we were back doing this show in a lobby in Waco, Texas, we said that. Now, those same people that were calling for inclusion and calling for a chance at the throne are now at the mercy and have been at the mercy of the Big Ten and the SEC. Not saying I like it, not saying I'm here for it. Again, if it were me, I'd go no auto bids, and I would reward teams, not conferences. But this is the world we're living in. This is going to, I believe, expedite in some way, shape, or form the super conference era getting here a lot more quickly. As I just said, if you're Clemson, if you're Florida State, if you're anyone that's not in the Big Ten or the SEC, I think as we see the writing on the wall, you're going to do everything in your power to do that. And I think it's maybe going to be a slower burn to get there, but when it comes to actually having a Big Ten and SEC, AFC, NFC model, I think that's probably closer than some of us would like to admit. I'd guess like the next decade or so, but I don't know. Life is crazy. Things happen fast. We'll see how this whole thing shakes out. Again, subscribe to the channel. Get in the comment section. Heck, get at me on the socials, Instagram and on Twitter, at JD PicKell. Let me know what you think of this, your take on it, and how you feel about the future of college football. Cato on the ones and twos for myself, JD PicKell. We appreciate y'all. We love y'all. We'll keep this party rolling. We will see y'all next time.